News of the times. The car murder that stunned Britain. Alfred Rouse and the unknown victim. Tonight, we end our January season of Firsts and Lasts with one of the most extraordinary crime stories of the early 20th century. A case so shocking, so bizarre, that detectives at that time could scarcely believe what they were seeing. It begins on a dark November night in 1930. A saloon motor car is found engulfed in flames on a quiet country road. Inside, rescuers make a horrifying discovery: the charred body of a man burned beyond recognition. But when police trace the registration, the supposed victim walks through the doors of a London police station very much alive. And so begins a manhunt, not for a missing driver, but for the identity of the man in the car and for the truth behind one of Britain's earliest and most disturbing murder by motor car cases. The suspect, Alfred Rouse, is a man with secrets, a travelling salesman with injuries from the Great War, a wife at home, and a hidden network of girlfriends, mistresses, and illegitimate children he proudly refers to as his harem. A man in deep financial trouble and looking for a way out. Tonight we follow the investigation that captivated the country, from the mysterious hatless stranger who walked away from the burning wreck to the confession that arrived only when the gallows were being prepared. This is the case that stunned Britain, reshaped forensic investigation, and left behind a question that haunts true crime historians to this day. Who was the man in the car? And in today's end of segment Further Particulars, we take a look at the fascinating world of letters to the editors for a peek behind the curtains of what the public in 1930s England were really thinking. Across these letters and adverts, we meet the anxieties, the hopes, contradictions and humour of the age. A reminder that while fashions, wages and miracle pills may change, people rarely do. Before we begin, if immersing yourself in a 1930s world of murder, mystery and the early stumbling steps of forensic science sounds like your cup of tea, do consider pressing any of the various buttons and symbols that YouTube kindly scatters around the screen. It helps the episode find its way to others wandering the YouTube countryside in search of a good historical scandal. And as great Aunt Edna insists we mention, it reassures the algorithm that we are worthy to be released from the proverbial broom cupboard. We thank you, and so does Great Aunt, who has been practicing her approval nod all morning. A tricky thing for her. So, with that said, settle back, make yourself comfortable, and let the bustle of the modern world slip quietly into the background. Tonight, we invite you to step with us into the fog-softened streets of 1930s England, a world of country lanes lit by weak headlamps, cigarette smoke curling in roadside inns, police constables in greatcoats, and a nation still finding its way between the old world and the new. Allow the clock to turn back almost a century and prepare to be transported to the moment when a burning motor car on a lonely road sparked one of the most extraordinary investigations of its age. Crime in motor cars before 1930. Before the Rouse case, crime involving motor cars was still a relatively new and unsettling phenomenon. Throughout the 1910s and 1920s, Most offences connected to motor vehicles were petty and practical rather than murderous. Stolen spark plugs, illegal joyrides, unlicensed taxis, drunken driving, and the occasional smash and grab where a car provided a quick escape. The idea of using a motor car as part of a planned violent crime was rare, largely because cars were expensive and still uncommon. Most people could identify their neighbours' vehicles on sight, and the earliest models were noisy, temperamental, and extremely poor for making discreet getaways. When motor vehicles did enter the criminal courts, it was usually in cases of manslaughter arising from dangerous driving, a new legal frontier that judges were still learning how to frame. But the notion of a car being used not merely as transport, but as the stage for murder itself, was virtually unheard of. Which is precisely why the discovery of a burning motor car on a Northamptonshire lane in 1930, with a charred, unidentified body inside, sent such a shock through both the public and the police. It represented something new, unnerving, and deeply modern, a crime made possible by a machine that most Britons had only begun just to trust. From the Daily Mirror, the 7th of November 1930. Mystery of a man's charred body in a blazing car, found amid the wreckage on a country road. Police search for hatless stranger, seen walking away by rescuers near the scene of the tragedy. Villagers leave beds to fight flames. It was definitely established last night that the charred body found in a blazing motor car at Hardingstone in Northants was that of a man. At first the body was thought to be that of a woman. The car was seen on fire at the roadside by two young men returning from a dance early yesterday, and villagers who were aroused from their beds to fight the flames discovered a body burned beyond recognition inside. It would appear from the position of the charred body that the man must have been sitting in the seat next to the driver. The two young men who found the body state that half a mile before they reached the car, they saw a well-dressed man, hatless, of apparently about 30 years of age, walk past them. Both describe him as wearing a light-coloured mackintosh and being about 5'8" or 5'9" in height, and he had black, curly hair. As they passed him, one of them shouted, What's the blaze?" The man then, they state, replied, "It looks as though someone's having a bonfire." While they were going to investigate, the hatless man was seen to walk off to a neighbouring crossroad and then turn toward Northampton and then retrace his steps in the direction of Wotton. The newspapers, as ever, seized upon every scrap of rumour: the hatless stranger, the charred remains, even the mysterious appearance of a woman's shoe heels among the wreckage. And for a short while the story existed in that peculiar early stage of an investigation, where speculation races ahead of fact and the public imagination gallops freely into the gaps. But behind the scenes, detectives were working with a far plainer question: whose car was it? For while the bizarre and blaze had destroyed the interior almost entirely, the registration plate had survived, and once the number was traced, the police were faced with a development far more astonishing than anything the villagers of Hardingstone had whispered among themselves that night. The man to whom the motor car belonged was very much alive, and within hours the quiet mystery of a burned out vehicle on a country road would transform into one of the most unsettling criminal investigations of its age. From the Daily Mirror, the 7th of November 1930, London motorist missing. By means of its index, the number of the car was traced to the ownership of a London commercial traveller, Mr. Alfred Rouse of Buxted Road, North Finchley. He left his home on Wednesday night and has not been seen since. The men, William Bailey and Alfred Brown, dashed half a mile for help, and a policeman and villagers got water in buckets from a pond and nearby cottages and extinguished the fire. Then, amid the wreckage, was found a charred body, so badly burned that it was impossible to say definitively whether it was that of a man or a woman. Eric Shaw, pathologist who examined the body found in the car, was able to state definitively that it is that of a man. Metal portions of a man's braces have been found. The car, a saloon, bore the London registration number MU1468. It was later found to be the property of a Mr. Alfred Arthur Rouse of Buxted Road, North Finchley, a commercial traveller. He left home at 5 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon and has not been seen since. From the Daily Mirror, the 8th of November 1930, car mystery. Northampton detectives come to London for the interview. Mr. Alfred Arthur Rouse of Buxted Road, Brian Barnet in North Finchley, the registered owner of the burnt saloon car in which a body was found at Hardingstone near Northampton, arrived in London last night. Detectives were waiting at the coach station at Hammersmith Broadway when the Northampton coach arrived. Mr. Rouse stepped from it, and after a few words with the detectives, they accompanied them to Hammersmith Police Station. Mr. Rouse, who is a commercial traveller, left home on Wednesday evening and had not been heard of until last night. Who was Alfred Rouse? Alfred Arthur Rouse was born on the 6th of April 1894 in Herne Hill in London into a troubled household. His mother, reportedly an actress, left the family when he was but 6 years old, leaving Rouse and his two siblings largely in the care of an aunt. A childhood marked by abandonment and early responsibility. By all contemporary accounts, he was a bright, athletic boy. He left school at 14, beginning life in the workforce as an office assistant before moving through a series of varied jobs in textiles and carpentry, all the while pursuing evening classes, music and self-improvement. War, injury and aftermath. Like many of his generation, Rouse served in the British Army during the First World War. He married his sweetheart, Lily May Watkins, just before being posted to France. In the conflict he suffered serious wounds, including to his head and leg, injuries that left lingering effects on his mobility and memory long after the war ended. Some clinicians later described aspects of his recovery as edging into neurosis, and he was known to laugh immoderately and display occasional forgetfulness. After the war, Rouse spent time rebuilding his health, swimming, joining sporting clubs, and learning automotive skills that would later serve him professionally. By the late 1920s, he had become a commercial traveller, a travelling salesman selling goods such as braces and garters. The job offered decent pay for the era, around £4 a week, plus commission, and enabled him and his wife to take on a mortgaged house in Finchley, North London. However, Rouse's personal life was anything but settled. As his travels took him around the country, he became intimately involved with a string of women, some of whom he married bigamously and others whom he promised he would wed. Rouse was involved with at least 3 mistresses, including a Miss Jenkins from Wales by 1930. The financial and legal obligations this created, including child support orders, placed growing pressure on his resources and reputation. Rouse reportedly referred to his network of lovers and the financial demands they placed on him as his harem. By the autumn of 1930, faced with mounting debt, a pregnant mistress, and mounting child support liabilities, Rouse began contemplating drastic measures. With detectives now certain that the man found in the burning car was not Rouse himself, attention turned to the stranger's final moments and to Rouse's increasingly fragile explanations. With Alfred Rouse, the owner of the motor car, now located, alive, well, and offering explanations that grew no sturdier under examination, the police found themselves confronted with 2 urgent questions. If Alfred Rouse had walked away from that burning vehicle, then who precisely was the man left inside it? And was this some ghastly accident or the deliberate staging of a murder? Detectives quickly uncovered several details that suggested the fire had not been an accident. At the back of the car lay an empty petrol tin, uncapped, scorched, and entirely out of place. The vehicle's fuel tank, too, was bone dry. Pathologists later noted that the intensity of the blaze was far greater than anything caused by an engine fault or a stray spark. Even the way the car had come to rest seemed deliberate. It had been drawn neatly onto the verge, as though positioned by a careful hand rather than abandoned in panic. And then there was the stranger. William Bailey and his cousin Alfred Brown, the first men on the scene, described a hatless, well-dressed man in a light mackintosh carrying an attaché case, calm enough to make a joke about the fire moments before walking away into the night. With these clues, police began considering a darker possibility, that the fire had been set intentionally and that the prime suspect might be in their custody, the owner of the blazing car with the charred body, Alfred Rouse. With Rouse now located, alive, articulate, and increasingly entangled in contradictions, detectives turned their attentions to the next crucial stage of the investigation, the inquest. Before any charge could be properly framed, the coroner needed to establish the bare minimum facts of the case. Who was the man in the car? How had he died? And was anyone seen leaving the scene? But just as officials prepared to open proceedings, police received a development that pushed the case from baffling into truly extraordinary. Reports began circulating that a lorry driver travelling toward London in the early hours of the morning had picked up a hatless man in a light mackintosh only a short distance from the burning car. The driver, accompanied by a mate, had apparently dropped the stranger somewhere on the outskirts of London, unaware at the time that he might be the last person to have seen a potential killer slip quietly into the night. But the inquest and the growing list of witnesses suggested the investigation was about to enter a far more revealing phase. From the Daily Mirror, the 10th of November 1930. Police appeal to the lorry driver in a blazing car mystery. The hatless man given a lift toward London from the scene of the tragedy. Rouse appears in court again today. Mallet discovered by detectives. trouser cloth only clue to the identity of the victim. After a weekend of dramatic surprises in the blazing car mystery, Alfred Arthur Rouse, the owner of the car, will appear in court at Northampton again today. Last night, the police issued an appeal asking a lorry driver to come forward. This driver is believed to have picked up a hatless man wearing a light mackintosh near the scene of the tragedy and have given him a lift to the neighbourhood of London. It is now known that the police found a mallet near the car, but great secrecy is being observed with regard to it. When Rouse was charged on Saturday with the wilful murder of some person unknown, he replied, "I'm innocent." In making the appeal to the lorry driver to come forward, Superintendent Brumby of the Northampton Police last night said, "I'm anxious for the lorry driver who was taking his vehicle to London, and he picked up a man on the London road about 200 yards past where it joins Hardingstone Road to get into touch with me. The man he picked up was wearing a light mackintosh and was hatless." Superintendent added that the lorry driver, who had a mate with him, apparently dropped the stranger near London. As the inquest unfolded, the tidy narrative of an unfortunate motoring accident began to unravel thread by thread. One by one, witnesses stepped forward, villagers, police officers, pathologists, and each added a detail that pushed the inquiry further from misadventure and closer towards something far darker. The position of the body, the deliberate way the car had been pulled off the road, the empty petrol tank, and now the first forensic findings. When the remnants of the victim's clothing were examined, they were found to be saturated with petrol, not merely singed by fire, but soaked through as if someone had doused the man before the flames were even ever lit. It was a detail impossible to reconcile with engine failure and devastating to any suggestion of an accidental blaze. With that revelation, the tone of the inquest shifted. This was no longer a question of how a man had died in a burning car, but who had put him there and why. And with the evidence mounting, attention turned firmly back to the man who walked away from the scene, Alfred Arthur Rouse. Following on certain inquiries which had been made, Rouse was brought before the magistrate, Mr. F. H. Thornton, this afternoon, and charged with the wilful murder of some person unknown. He was remanded until Monday at 3 o'clock. A piece of trouser was found adhered to the part of the car where the man had evidently sat. The cloth was of good quality, probably brown and lavender and ribbed. It is understood that the piece of trouser cloth was saturated with petrol. It has now been revealed that in the early stages of their investigation, the police found a mallet close to the scene of the fire. No statement as to the nature of the mallet or its condition when found has been made. Rouse's reply when charged at the special police court was, "I am innocent." The story, extraordinarily grisly and unlike anything the police had seen, spread across national and regional headlines like wildfire. Within hours, newspapers from London to the smallest country weeklies were carrying updates on the blazing car mystery, and the public followed every scrap of information with morbid fascination. And with the press came witnesses, dozens of them. Villagers who had seen the flames, motorists who had glimpsed the hatless stranger, people who suddenly remembered passing a lonely figure on the Northampton road that night. Each new statement added another piece to a puzzle that seemed to grow stranger rather than clearer. The case was now so unusual, so starkly modern in its brutality, that police turned to the most famous forensic mind in Britain. Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the nation's preeminent pathologist, was brought in to examine the charred remains found in the wrecked motor car. If anyone could exact truth from what little the fire had left behind, it was Spilsbury, and his findings would push detectives even further towards a single unavoidable conclusion. This was not an accident. It was murder. From the Daily Mirror, 11th of November 1930. Developments in the mystery of the dead man in the blazing motor car at Hardingstone, Northants, crowded upon each other yesterday. Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the famous pathologist, went to Northampton and examined the charred body. Alfred Rouse, commercial traveller of North Finchley, the owner of the car, was remanded on the charge of murder. The lorry driver sought by the police came forward and made a statement. Sir Bernard Spilsbury, on arrival at Northampton, went almost immediately to the little garage at the side of the hotel where the remains had been lain since they were taken from the blazing car. His post-mortem examination lasted for several hours, and afterwards certain organs of the body were put in sealed boxes and taken away in his car. Mr. Harry Turner, motor driver of Buildings, Charterhouse Street, Holborn, Mr. Edwin Pitt of Argyle Street, who accompanied Mr. Turner on journeys, went to Bow Road Police Station yesterday, where Turner said he had given a man answering the circulated description a lift from Hardingstone to Tally Ho Corner in Finchley. Ask him to turn. Dead silence in court during dramatic evidence of identification. There were many tense moments at Northampton Police Court yesterday when Alfred Rouse was charged with the murder of a certain man whose name is unknown. Rouse, who was unshaven and wore neither collar nor tie, was not legally represented. William B.H. Bailey, a shoe operative at Hardingstone, said that last Thursday at about 1:50 a.m. he was walking to his home when, near the turning to Hardingstone from the London road, he saw a man there. There was a dramatic moment when Superintendent Pebby said, "Can you see the man in court?" Slowly Bailey looked at Rouse, who was only a few feet away from him. Can you ask the man to turn round?" said Bailey. Rouse looked at Bailey and then turned to the right until Bailey could get a profile view of him. There was dead silence when Bailey said, "That is the man." When Rouse next appeared at Northampton Police Court, the prosecution presented a set of allegations that electrified the room. According to Mr. Paling, Speaker for the Crown, every forensic indication pointed toward a deliberate killing. The victim, he argued, appeared to have been rendered unconscious, placed inside the car, soaked in petrol, and then set alight. A sequence so controlled, he said, that it was hard to imagine it being anything other than intentional. And the motive, the Crown suggested, was painfully simple. Rouse, weighed down by debt, women, and scandal, might have found it no great inconvenience if a burned body were taken for his own, allowing him to vanish cleanly from the complications of his life. As the inquest moved into its next phase, Rouse himself appeared oddly unshaken by the mounting revelations. He sat through the evidence with an air of careful composure, occasionally attentive, occasionally distant, but never visibly distressed by the increasingly grim portrait being painted of the blaze on the Hardingstone road. In the public gallery his wife remained steadfast. She had travelled up from London, face pale and drawn, following each detail with a kind of quiet, bewildered loyalty that several reporters remarked upon. Whatever else Alfred Rouse had been in recent years, she had come to stand by him now. From the Daily Mirror, the 28th of November, 1930. Sensational police theory in blazing car mystery. The prosecution suggests that the victim was stunned and then burned alive. Counsel's reference to two other women, story of statement about an expensive harem, Mrs. Rouse sits near the husband, dash for aspirins by wife when he complained. Rouse, who was immaculately dressed, sat back in the chair in the dock and stroked his thick black hair, which was brushed back from the forehead. In a seat almost parallel to him, Mrs. Rouse, alone, she occasionally glanced towards her husband, but he was apparently unaware of her presence. And at one stage in the proceedings, Rouse, who appeared to be suffering from a headache, asked for aspirins. Mrs. Rouse at once proffered a bottle of smelling salts, and when Rouse declined it, she immediately left the court and shortly afterwards returned with aspirins, which were given to Rouse. As the inquest continued, the portrait of Alfred Rouse grew stranger still. His demeanour remained curiously calm, almost detached, and his loyal wife remained in the court throughout, watching as the evidence against her husband deepened hour by hour. But it was when the prosecution opened their full case that the proceedings shifted decisively. Counsel for the Crown began by reconstructing Rouse's movements that night. Two local men, William Bailey and Alfred Brown, testified that as they approached the blaze, flames leaping 12 feet into the air, they saw a man step out of the ditch, brushing himself down as though emerging from the hedge. When they called out, he casually remarked, "Looks as if someone's having a bonfire." That man, they now believe, was Alfred Rouse. The two witnesses walked on toward the burning motor car. The stranger walked briskly away. Minutes later, a lorry driver confirmed that he had picked up a hatless man in a light mackintosh on the same road and given him a lift toward London. The man never mentioned that the flaming wreck behind him was his own vehicle. From there, Rouse travelled first to London and then to South Wales, turning up unexpectedly at the home of the Jenkins family, where he was courting their daughter, who was pregnant and known locally as Mrs. Rouse. When asked by her father why he had arrived without his motor car, Rouse replied lightly, "Oh, it was stolen last night at Northampton." Meanwhile, detectives located a significant new clue at the scene. A heavy wooden mallet found 14 yards from the car, recently dropped and smelling faintly of petrol. Rouse admitted it was his. When confronted by police after his return to London, Rouse appeared exhausted and resigned. "I'm very glad it's all over," he said. "I was going to Scotland Yard about it. I was responsible." The prosecution within the inquest now had the findings of the pathologists. Dr. Eric Shaw and Sir Bernard Spilsbury examined what remained of the body and agreed on two critical points. The man was alive when the fire started. His clothing showed clear evidence of having been soaked in petrol. The petrol tank of the car showed no sign of internal explosion. Instead, a 2-gallon spare can in the rear had burst from the heat while its screw cap was still intact, strongly suggesting that petrol had been poured externally and deliberately ignited. Finally, strands of hair found on the mallet were confirmed to be human and not Rouse's. At this stage, The Crown offered the inquest a chilling interpretation. The victim had likely been rendered unconscious, placed in the vehicle, doused with petrol, and deliberately set alight. And, they added, the timing could hardly be ignored. Rouse was financially overstretched, entangled with multiple women, facing new child support liabilities, and contemplating disappearance. The logic was grimly simple. If the burned body was assumed to be his, all of Rouse's troubles would disappear with it. As this evidence accumulated, Rouse's earlier casualness began to look less like confidence and more like calculation. As the inquest pressed on, the prosecution shifted its focus from the scene of the fire to the life Rouse had been leading in the months before it. If the motive was to disappear, they argued, the clearest evidence would be found not on the roadside at Hardingstone, but among the women whose financial claims were rapidly closing around him. And so, one by one, the court heard from members of what Rouse himself liked to call his harem, young women from different corners of the country, some pregnant, some expecting marriage, some believing themselves already married, each describing a man who travelled wildly, promised freely, and supported none of them reliably. From the Daily Mail, the 16th of December, 1930, Rouse's girlfriend called in burnt car case. Evidence of Nellie Tucker. For the first time since the case began, Mrs. Rouse did not appear in court at the same time as her husband took his place in the dock. Two women figured in the proceedings when the Blazing Cart murder charge was again heard at Northampton yesterday. One was Nellie Tucker, who was mentioned earlier as the girl Rouse went to see in hospital. She gave evidence and said Rouse was the father of her two children. The other woman was one whose name was revealed for the first time as Helen Campbell of Chatham, and she was heavily veiled. Veiled woman. New witness arrives in a motor car with her solicitor. Rouse was brought by motor car from Bedford and smuggled into court unobserved. Just before the proceedings were about to begin, the woman who has been mentioned but never named arrived in a car with the blinds drawn. She was heavily veiled, walked into court with her solicitor, Mr. Flint. A minor sensation was caused by Mr. Flint, who, addressing the magistrate, said, "I understand the person whose interests I have been instructed to watch will be called as a witness today, and in order to prevent misunderstanding, I wish to say at this stage that her name is Helen Campbell of Chatham." Helen Campbell, waitress. She said that her name was Helen Campbell and that she lived at Nelson Road in Chatham and that she was a waitress. She first met Rouse in 1920. She confirmed she had had a child on October the 21st, 1921, but that it had died at 5 weeks old. On July the 22nd, 1925, she gave birth to another boy. The father was Arthur Rouse. She added that on October the 17th, 1929, she obtained an order against Rouse in the Guildhall Police Court for the maintenance of the boy. She came to an agreement with Rouse, and the child went to Rouse's house in Buxted Road, from Barnet, this summer. V12. William Jenkins, colliery proprietor of Primrose Villa in Gallagher in South Wales, said that he had a daughter, Ivy Muriel, who had worked as a probationary nurse in London. He first met Rouse in July last, when he went to the house with Ivy and said that they were married. He then discovered that they went to a bogus office and they were not married. A sensation was caused in court when Mr. Paling, prosecuting, said, "The next witness I shall call is Miss Tucker, a slender, dark-haired girl with a pale complexion, wearing a blue hat and a black coat trimmed with grey fur, walked towards the witness box when the bench decided to hear her evidence. She said she was a domestic servant living at Hendon Way in London. She had known Rouse for nearly 5 years, and she had given birth to a child on May the 2nd, 1928. Mr. Paling, who is the father?" Tucker inclined her head towards the dock and whispered, "The Rouse." She gave her evidence in a very low tone throughout, her voice frequently dropping to little more than a whisper. Mr. Paling asked if Rouse had contributed toward the maintenance of the child, and Miss Tucker said yes. She gave birth to another child on October the 29th this year at the City of London Maternity Hospital, City Road. Rouse was also the father of this child. She last saw him between 7 and 8 o'clock at night on November the 5th, when he visited her at a maternity hospital, and after the birth of the first child, they remained friendly. The police court, Rouse admitted that he was the father and offered 10 shillings a week. Miss Tucker agreed with counsel that the reason she went to court was at the time that she was at an institution, and the authorities there said she must take proceedings. Rouse smiled to Miss Tucker as she left the witness box. As the prosecution drew together the threads of motive, opportunity, and behaviour, the inquest turned to its final and most decisive component, the scientific evidence. To establish precisely how the unknown man died and whether the fire had been accident or design, the Crown called upon the forensic foremost authorities of the day. Among them was the man whose very presence could chill a courtroom into silence, Sir Bernard Spilsbury, Britain's most celebrated and most feared pathologist. Alongside Dr. Eric Shaw, he examined what little remained of the body in the burned-out car. With the arrival of Spilsbury, the inquest shifted from rumour, contradiction, and competing stories to the cold, uncompromising language of forensic fact. What he revealed would leave the court in no doubt about the nature of the crime and the fate of the man whose identity Britain was still struggling to uncover. From the Daily Mail, the 16th of December, 1930. Petrol leak in Rouse's car. A blaze of exceptional volume. Broken skull. Victim's head to have been in 34 pieces. Colonel Cuthbert Buckle said that he had experience of 10,000 fires and had investigated many cases of the burning of motor vehicles. Colonel Buckle, the mechanical expert called by the prosecution, examined the wreckage of Rouse's car and quickly dismissed the idea of an accidental fire. He noted a slightly loose exhaust manifold, enough, he said, to cause a flare if there had been a petrol leak while the engine was running. But crucially, there was no sign of fire beneath the engine sump, the one place an exhaust-related blaze would have taken hold. Instead, the greatest intensity of burning was found inside the body of the car, beneath and around the seats, exactly where a deliberate ignition would have been the most devastating effect. Buckle also inspected the spare petrol can recovered from the scene. Its handle was gone, the threaded cap ring blown away. In his view, the can had itself been on fire with petrol still inside, even if only a small amount. The evidence entirely consistent with petrol being poured or splashed in the interior before the blaze began. Asked whether he found any indication that this could have been an accidental fire from mechanical failure, Buckle's answer was firm. None whatever. Wooden mallet. There was a tense silence in court when Mr. Paling produced a wooden mallet with one end of the head covered with the paper. Witness Dr. Shaw said, I found a considerable amount of dirt and several hairs adhering to it. Sir Bernard Spilsbury was also called. The fracture of the vault of the skull of the victim, you said, was probably caused by the very high temperature to which it had been exposed. The black deposit in the air passages and other indications in the lungs were due to inhaling smoke and hot air. It indicates that the deceased was alive when the flames began and continued to breathe some time after the fire had started. One of the hairs on the mallet was a human hair. With the noose tightening steadily, the eyewitness accounts, the petrol evidence, the mallet, and now the authorities' findings of Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the inquest left Alfred Rouse with vanishingly little room to manoeuvre. And then, in a move that surprised many in the courtroom, Rouse chose to do something defendants rarely risk in such circumstances. He elected to testify on his own behalf. Whether it was confidence, desperation, or the instinct of a man used to talking his way through life, Rouse now stepped forward to give the inquest his version of events, a story that he insisted would explain everything that had happened on that dark Northamptonshire road. Rouse's defence. From the Daily Mirror, the 17th of November 1930. Rouse committed for trial on murder charge. Rouse, in his statement, described how he picked up a man on the road near St Albans and detailed the journey up to the stop at Hardingstone to fill up with petrol. He went down the road, he said, after asking the man to put some petrol in the tank from the spare can. He had a wooden mallet which he kept in the car to beat out dents on the wings. He'd been carrying it for 6 weeks. After I got out, the statement went on, I walked 200 or 300 yards. While I was there, I saw a light on the hedge in front. I thought it was a car coming with headlights. A moment later, my car was in flames. I stood still. I was terrified at the sight. I left my case and ran towards the car. I ran as fast as I could. The flames were coming out from all around, and I couldn't see inside for the flames. I ran back in the direction I'd come, towards the village, shouting, then ran back past the car to where I had left my case, picked it up and ran toward the main road. I was panic-stricken. I saw 2 young men coming toward me from the direction of Northampton. I was going to speak, but I walked away from them. I do not think they spoke, but I shouted something. I cannot remember what it was. I turned towards London. My only thought was to get away from the horror. I was on my way to Leicester on Wednesday when this happened. I was going to hand in my slips on Thursday morning to draw some more money from my firm. I was then going to Wales for the weekend. Inspector Lawrence said that Rouse stated to him, my wife is really too good for me. I like a woman who will make a fuss of me. I don't ever remember my wife sitting on my knee, but otherwise she is a good wife, and I am very friendly with several women. It's a very expensive game. My harem takes me to several places, and I am not at home a great deal, but my wife does not ask questions. With the forensic findings laid bare and the testimony of witnesses complete, the magistrates delivered their decision. Alfred Arthur Rouse would be committed for trial on a charge of wilful murder. For the first time during the proceedings, Rouse's composure wavered. When asked whether he wished to say anything before he was sent for trial, he spoke in a strained, choked voice, part indignation, part resignation. I'm quite innocent of the charge. I have made my statement. Not being a wealthy man, whether I found guilty or not, my all is taken. It was a curious defence, at once a denial and a lament for a life he claimed was already ruined. With that, the inquest closed, and the case that had begun with a burning car on a country road now moved toward the Crown Court, where the full weight of evidence, motive, and forensic science would be tested before a jury. The Coventry Evening Telegraph, the 29th of January 1931, body in blazing car, murder trial at Northampton. Prisoner gives evidence. Crowd again rush assizes to court doors. Extraordinary scenes were witnessed outside Northampton Assize Court this morning when the trial of Alfred Arthur Rouse was resumed. When the doors were opened, there was a stampede for admission by a large number of people who had been standing for a long time in a queue. Women behind pushed and struggled, and extra police who had been placed on duty to deal with the crowd had the greatest difficulty in stemming the rush. After a few people had been admitted, the door became jammed with men who refused to go away. Women behind and struggled. Finally, the doors were closed, and it was a long time before the disappointed crowd dispersed. When the case reached the Crown Court, it became a sensation. Reporters filled every available seat, eager to witness the first full public hearing of the extraordinary evidence that had emerged at the inquest. Piece by piece, the prosecution reconstructed the night of the fire. Witnesses placing Rouse at the scene, the petrol-soaked remains of the victim's clothing, the mallet found on the road with human hairs attached, and the growing financial pressure of his harem, wives, mistresses, pregnant girlfriends, all awaiting support he could no longer provide. And presiding over the scientific heart of the case was Sir Bernard Spilsbury, whose calm, precise testimony left the jury in no doubt that the man in the burning car had been alive when the flames took hold. The trial revisited every detail the inquest had laid before them, but now under sharper scrutiny and with a clarity that made the defence's story of a mysterious hitchhiker seem increasingly untenable. In the end, the jury required only 25 minutes to reach their decision. Alfred Arthur Rouse was found guilty of wilful murder. There was no audible reaction from the dock. Rouse simply stood, a man who had tried to vanish in the flames of his own motor car, now confronted with the full consequence of his actions. From the Daily News of London, 2nd of February 1931, the Rouse verdict. A great many people were surprised at the verdict on Alfred Arthur Rouse. The man himself is not likely to have attracted any public sympathy. His unsavoury past, his facile and wholesale lying, his demeanour in the witness box, all served to make him a somewhat repulsive figure. This, however, is only remotely and indirectly relevant to the issue. The question, as the judge pointed out in his admirable summing up, was not whether Rouse committed the horrible and extraordinary murder of which he was accused, but whether the crime was proved to the jury that no real doubt remained in the minds of any of them. The jury gave a courageous and honest answer to that question, but the judge himself noted very properly certain weaknesses in the delicate chain of circumstantial evidence forged by the prosecution, and, at any rate, to the lay mind, the evidence, though it builds up a case of the greatest possible suspicion suggests many conflicting and perplexing considerations. These considerations may well be that they will come eventually under the careful scrutiny of the Home Office, acting in a life and death issue in the highest public interest on behalf of the Crown. But there was to be no reprieve. The Home Secretary declined to intervene, and the date of execution was set. Rouse's final confession. Only days before he was due to hang, Rouse broke his long, shifting silence. In a letter sent to the Daily Sketch, he laid out, at last, the story he claimed was the truth. He admitted that he had often fantasized about disappearing, staging his own death to escape the tangle of maintenance orders, financial obligations, and romantic entanglements that had grown beyond his control. The idea, he said, had been with him for months. On the night of the crime, Rouse wrote, he encountered a down-on-his-luck stranger near a public house, a man who, in his words, was in difficulties. Seeing an opportunity, he decided to act. He bought whiskey to get the man drunk. Once inside the car, he strangled him into unconsciousness. He then poured petrol over the man and inside the vehicle, setting the car alight in the hope that the body would be mistaken for his own. At first he thought he had succeeded. When he saw his photograph in the newspapers naming him as the missing motorist in the Hardingstone mystery, he panicked, realizing he could not simply vanish. That, he said, was why he told friends in Wales the car had been stolen. He insisted to the last that he did not know the name of the man that he had killed. Alfred Arthur Rouse was executed at Bedford Jail on the 12th of March, 1931. In the weeks before his death, he received regular visits, not only from two of the mistresses he had courted across the country, but also from his loyal wife, who had remained steadfast through every revelation. Thus ended the case that shocked Britain, a murder born of desperation, deception, and a modern world in which a motor car had become the stage for a crime unlike anything the courts had yet seen. Further particulars. In today's Further Particulars, we wander away from the courtroom and into the columns of letters to the editor, whose marvellous little pockets of public opinion that reveal far more about the national mood than any politician's speech ever could. And so, through the pages of 1930, we catch a glimpse of what truly preoccupied the average newspaper reading Britain. We begin with that most enduring British instinct, the fierce defence of eccentricity. From the Daily Mirror, the 7th of February, 1930, as it strikes our readers, letters to the editor, busybodies, low wages, famous authors. Is not the meddlesome interference with the domestic concerns of our canal dwellers part and parcel of the soulless endeavour to reduce the population of these isles to one common humdrum type? Last year, it was the gypsies who were threatened with vexatious restrictions, and now it is the bargees. There are busybodies in our midst who seem to loathe the picturesque and bizarre, and who would much like to see everyone standardised to one universal prim and priggish level. Next comes a theme so timeless it might have been penned yesterday. How on earth is a young woman meant to live independently on the wages available? A living wage. Authorities seem to be quite agreed that it is very difficult for a girl to live independently on 35 shillings a week. So it is not surprising that a serious proportion of wage earners' families cannot possibly maintain an adequate standard of living. One reform needed for the solution of the problem of insufficient wages and other social problems is a big reduction of the crushing taxation, and another is that the poor people should not have more than 2 children per family. And then we tumble back into one of the great preoccupations of Georgian, Victorian, Edwardian, and evidently post-Edwardian Britain. Should one marry for love or financial convenience? Marriage without love. I was much interested in Mr. Horace Newt's article, "The Misery We Call Love." Surely a loveless world would very soon be uninhabited. Marriage without love is a most contemptible thing, and in almost every case means lifelong misery. Although an unhappy marriage may ruin one's life, a marriage with sincere love gives more happiness than any other state, and one must take a chance. Let us all call love a gamble, not a disease. And finally, because no newspaper age is complete without it, the eternal pursuit of youthfulness. If 1930s advertising is to be believed, middle age is not caused by time at all, but by tired blood. Fortunately, the solution was simple: pink pills. Advertisement. The woman of 40. Middle age comes far too soon. That will be your soulful cry if you let the cares of life exhaust your blood, leaving you tired and worn. Women especially are prone to neglect their health. All their anxiety is for other people. They become middle-aged and suffer in the process merely because their blood is exhausted. Not so the woman who preserves her youth so long as she can. She does not cause anxiety to those who love her by being ill or being always having a headache or a pain in her side. Her blood is in good order, rich, red and pure. She never has a headache and is always cheerful and active. The vitality and youthfulness that abundance of good blood gives can all be yours if you like. Well, to make rich red blood, you have only to take Dr. Williams's pink pills. You will soon feel the new blood tingling in your veins. Your backache will go, your appetite will improve, and you will be happy yourself and give happiness to others. So begin Dr. Williams' pink pills now. You will be surprised at the increased vitality and the new zest for life that they will give you. And with that, our journey through smoky lanes, suspicious petrol cars, and the perplexing love life of Mr. Alfred Rouse comes to an end. Do gather your belongings before disembarking. Spectacles, gloves, moral certainties, and if you'd be so kind as to brush the biscuit crumbs off your face before you go, there's a good chap. On your way out, do remember to remove your deer stalker cap. Nothing startles the neighbours quite like someone stepping into the daylight looking as though they've just solved a murder. Now then, the YouTube bit. If you've enjoyed being transported back to the 1930s England, or if you simply like watching us square up to the YouTube algorithm, that digital Moriarty with far too much time on its hands, you can help us enormously by pressing any of the generous buttons and symbols scattered about the screens. A like, a comment, a subscribe. Each one is another triumphant blow struck in the ongoing battle to convince the algorithm that historical crime is the height of sophistication and should be shown to everyone, everywhere, immediately. And if you'd like even more, and we do mean much more, our paid Patreon members receive access to all 3 exclusive series, weekly downloaded PDF magazines, early ad-free episodes, and a growing archive of beautifully illustrated oddities from across the centuries. We'd love to see you there, but as ever, your company here is already a pleasure. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, amateur archivist, part-time biscuit wrangler, and founding member of the Society for the Prevention of Unruly Petrol Cans. And if whoever finished the last of the tea could be an angel and fetch a pint of milk, that would be grand. Great Aunt says she refuses to face Saturday on an empty pot. Till next time, take care, stay curious, and thank you for watching.